Welcome to Third Floor Views, a production of Chesapeake Family Life, where we talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Janet Jefferson. Today, we're talking about fossil hunting with kids. And joining us today is Dr. Stephen Godfrey, Curator of Paleontology at the Calvert Marine Museum. Thank you so much, Dr. Godfrey, for being here today.
Yeah, sure, my pleasure.
To our viewers, please feel to submit any questions that you have in the comments section, and we will try to get to as many as we can. Let's dive right in. So today we're primarily focusing on fossil hunting, but before we sort of get into the depths of that, I would love just to hear a little bit about your work at the Calvert Marine Museum and what does it actually mean to be a paleontologist? What does your day-to-day look like?
So thank you, Janet, for the invitation to be here. It's a great pleasure. I love talking about paleontology, and every fossil tells a story, and I love telling stories. So I'm a scientist, but I'm also a storyteller, and that's what's great about paleontology. So my mandate here at the Marine Museum is to collect, preserve, and interpret the local fossil resource. But in 2018, we became the Center for Maryland Paleontology. So I can look at fossils from anywhere in the state of Maryland, but I would have to say that most of my focus is on fossils that come from along the famous Calvert Cliffs. And that's going to be our focus today with the fossils I'm going to show you and where to go to collect. So my day-to-day, I'm really extremely fortunate because a lot of amazing fossils come to me. I'm not a particularly gifted fossil finder, but I'm surrounding myself with lots of people who are. And I get these amazing fossils, and we'll look at some of these a little bit later, that come to me, and I get to tell their story. So every fossil tells a story. There's information that's locked in that fossil, and it can't speak for itself. And so I interpret that fossil, and I'm able to pull the story out. So I'm like a detective, and I have to sleuth around and find the answers and tell that story. And I get to research fossils, and so every fossil is different. And I get to publish in scientific journals, and I love doing that. And then we make the information also accessible to the public with press releases, and I love doing that because it takes what might be a complicated publication, sort of for the technical aspect of paleontology, and make it sort of exciting for the general public. And I've also been in a number of documentaries, which is great fun too. So yeah, and we have a fossil club at the Marine Museum. And we do field trips, although not as many as we used to because of COVID, and some of the locations have closed down. But I'm really exceedingly blessed by being able to study fossils.
It sounds like a lot of fun. And it sounds like you do a lot of really diverse things, you know, from writing to talking to different people to actually getting in there hands-on with fossils and trying to figure things out. So if you're interested in fossil hunting, what do you feel like is the best way to go about it? What are sort of the first steps to get started with fossil hunting?
Well, I think just getting out into the field, out along the cliffs, there are a number of locations, I think about 5 locations where the public can access Calvert Cliffs. Unfortunately, most of the cliffs are privately owned. And so you just can't go anywhere and collect fossils. You have to go to places where public access is granted, and just start collecting fossils. And there's a lot of resources available on our website, calvertmarinemuseum.com. And I can take you through those and show you how to find that information on identifying the fossils. But just get out in the field and start collecting fossils. And most of the fossils, most of the organic material, the shells and shark teeth that are found along Calvert Cliffs are actually fossils from the cliffs that have eroded out onto the beach. And so fossils that are found on the beach, you can keep those. You don't have to turn them into anybody. They can be part of your own collection. And so you can start your very own fossil collection, which is a great way, probably the best way to learn about paleontology. There's no substitute for actually having the genuine articles, and being able to identify them, and going to look for resources so that you can identify them. And once you identify it, then it gives you a lot more information and appreciation for the diversity of life. And I think that would be the best way of just jumping in and you know, going and collecting fossils. So as I mentioned, there are a number of great places to find fossils. And if you go to our website, calvertmarinemuseum.com, on the headliner, there is a title that says, there's a drop down that says Explore the Museum. So if you click on that, and the drop down menu, you will see that there's a a line in there that says Paleontology Gallery. Well, just below that, you'll see a line that is entitled Paleontology. It will take you to a page that in the left-hand side, it has a little gray box, and in there you'll see fossil identification. And then below that, there's another line that says want to learn more. So if you click on the fossil identification, you'll be able to identify the vast majority of the fossils from pictures that we have and scale bars, pictures of the fossils that are found along Calvert Cliffs. And then if you want to learn more, if you click on that box, it will take you to a little map of Calvert County, showing you the 5 locations that are easily accessible by land to the cliffs, or to beaches, I should say beaches, because not all of them have cliffs, to beaches where you can collect fossils. Now, if you own a boat, you can come ashore just about anywhere. I would not recommend you try to like approach the nuclear power plant or the LNG, the liquefied natural gas plant. You might get a little bit exercised and excited about a boat coming ashore. But anywhere else along the county, so long as you stay below the mean high tide and you don't excavate into the cliffs. In Calvert County and the state of Maryland, private property extends down to the mean high tide. So all the cliffs are privately owned or owned by Calvert County or the state of Maryland. And so you have to remember that if you see a fossil that's in the cliff face, as tempting as it might be to get out a screwdriver or a little like trowel and dig it out, you're not allowed to touch it because that would be considered trespassing. So if you know the property owner, or you can get permission from the property owner, which is what we have to do every time we excavate, we have to get permission from the property owner, then you could dig out the fossils. The best place that I would recommend that people go if they're first starting out collecting fossils would be at the northern end of Calvert County at a place called Bayfront Park.
Bayfront Park.
Yeah, Bayfront Park. It used to be known as Brownie's Beach. So you might see it referred to online as Brownie's Beach, but it's now referred to as Bayfront Park. And there's a parking lot, and it's only about a 1/10 of a mile walk from the small parking lot to the beach. Now, I'm going to quickly say that there is a fee that's charged from the May long weekend, from Memorial Day to the end of Labor Day, that weekend. And I find it quite expensive. But if you go any other time of the year, it's free, provided there's parking space. Now, it is a very popular beach. When you get to the beach, my recommendation for how to collect fossils is don't worry about bringing tools. If I forget, remind me about what tools you can bring, but you really don't need tools to begin collecting fossils. What I do is I stand with my back to the bay, with my feet right where the waves are breaking. Pick a day when it's not really, really windy, or else the wind is blowing from the west. It might be blowing the tide out. And you don't want like a stormy day when the waves are already crashing. Calm waves, calm water is much easier and easier to find fossils in. So I stand with my back to the bay, my feet in the water, and right where the waves are curling over, there's sort of a little berm, and there's a little bit coarser, gravelly sand right there. Take your hands and scoop up that gravelly sand and just toss it up onto the beach so the waves can wash it. And as the waves are washing it, you'll keep your eyes open for a little dark colored shark teeth. And they look like shark teeth, and you'll probably find shark teeth that are really tiny, but that's okay. And when I say tiny, I mean tiny.
Oh yeah.
So little shark teeth. You'll be lucky, and you'll find ones that are about this size.
Oh,
so
wow.
most of the shark teeth that are found along Calvert Cliffs are of this kind of shark. This is a gray shark. So gray sharks today include the most successful group of sharks, nearshore sharks. They include bull sharks, dusky sharks, silky sharks. So their teeth are found. So scoop up that coarse sandy material, toss it up onto the beach, and let the waves wash it. And as the waves are washing it, keep an eye out for those little teeth, and you'll have to move quickly, or else the teeth will disappear back into the water. And so then you can pick out the teeth and just keep a little plastic bag or a little plastic pill jar, and you can pop your teeth in that. So that's the best place to find shark teeth. There, and another place immediately south is called Breezy Point. Breezy Point Beach is another place to go. There's a fee charged. Let's see, they're open from April 15th, so they're open now until October 15th.
Okay.
And so there's a fee, and you can look just in the sand on the beach. There aren't any cliffs there, but you can just dig in the sand and do the same thing, and you'll find shark teeth there. So what's interesting about Bayfront Park is, now if you're standing on the beach and you're facing the bay, to your right, you'd be looking south along the cliffs. Now there are low cliffs right there, so you'll get a sense of what the Calvert Cliffs look like right there on the beach, on the public beach. But if you're willing and it's low tide and you don't mind getting wet, water up to your knees, walk south. There's a point about a quarter mile south, and if you walk around that point, you will see the spectacular high, about 75 to 80 feet high cliffs that comprise the northern end of the most spectacular section of Calvert Cliffs. Now, you have to be careful when you're walking along those cliffs because the sediments are not consolidated. They're not cemented together. So you could walk up to the cliff face and with your fingernails, you could just start excavating into the cliff. They're very soft. Wow. But what that means also is that those cliffs can fail catastrophically. So in the 23 years that I've been here at the Marine Museum, nobody has been killed along Calvert Cliffs from sediment crushing down on top of them.
That's good.
And I hope it never happens, but it had happened sometime prior to my arrival here as curator. Somebody did die. They went behind a slump that was already down on the beach and it collapsed on them. Unfortunately, they died. But I'm also going to say that it's going to be way more dangerous to drive to the cliffs than it is to ever walk along the cliffs. But you just have to be mindful. Stay out away from the base of the cliff. And if there's large chunks that have come down and you see fossils in those, you can actually take the fossils out of those. You'll see a lot of shell material. So the shells, for the most part, are going to be bleached white like this. White shells. This is oops, I just dumped a lot of sand on my keyboard.
Oh no.
So this is a moon snail and the shells are bleached white. So you won't find color in any of the shells except for the Ecphora shells. This is an Ecphora shell. It's the state fossil for the state of Maryland. We also have a state dinosaur, which is not found in this region. It's found between Washington and Baltimore in rocks that are much, much, much older. The age of the rocks that are found along Calvert Cliffs range in age from about 18 million years old to about 8 million years old. So there's roughly 10 million years worth of Earth geologic history preserved in the cliffs. Wow. But this is an Ecphora shell. It's a snail shell, and they would have moved along on their muscular foot, and they were predatory. And sometimes you'll find fossils that have little holes in them. Here's another type of shell that can be found along Calvert Cliffs. This is a large scallop shell called Chesapeake. And you'll notice that there's a little hole right here. Well, that's evidence of prehistoric predation. These guys were
the snail.
The snail,
that's
yeah.
Great.
The snail came along and it attached itself right here, held on with its muscular foot, and their saliva is acidic. And so they can sort of soften the shell, and then they use their tongue or their teeth called a radula to rasp a little hole, and then they can stick their little, almost like an elephant trunk through the hole and suck out the insides, and so they're predatory. So just some examples of some of the fossils that can be found along Calvert Cliffs.
So cool.
At the north end of the county, you will find a lot of shell material, but walk a little bit further south around that point at Bayfront Park.
So what is the history of this? Why is this area so rich in fossils? Why are we seeing this deposition and now this exposure of this?
Well, as a result of the last ice age, because of the weight of the ice on the continent that came down as far as New York City, it depressed the continent there. There was a mile of thickness of ice on the continent, but in front of it, it bulged it up a little bit. It's like when I was a child and I would help my mom make bread. We would knead the bread and you would push your fingers into the bread dough, and in front of your fingers, the bread dough would bulge up. Well, the top of that bulge is like the continental crust here, and the top of that crust represents Calvert Cliffs. And so they've been raised a little bit. Now that the ice is gone from the ice age, New York City is actually rebounding back up. This happens like millimeters per year. So it's very, very slow, the way that the continental crust moves. And New York City is coming up and Calvert Cliffs are going down. Okay, very, very slowly. And the level of the water in the bay is coming up. And so that's why it's always undercutting the bottom of the cliff. And so that's why the cliff face is basically vertical and sheer. And the sediments are soft enough that waves can actually erode fairly quickly. So it erodes inches per year back. So think of the cliffs as a giant layer cake that goes all the way to Washington, D.C. It narrows, it pinches out as it gets closer to D.C., the layers of sediment. But out here, where we have the cliff, it's like a giant layer cake. And all those layers represent sediments that were laid down on the bottom of the ocean during the Miocene epoch, when global climate was warmer than it is today. There was no ice at the North Pole. There was less ice at the South Pole. So the level of the water in the oceans was deeper. And so it flooded all of the Atlantic coastal plain, this area. And so rivers were carrying eroded sediments from the Appalachian and Piedmont mountains and depositing them, laying them down in layers. And the animals that were the fish and the sharks and the turtles and the whales and dolphins and some land animals that were in these waters, that were living, making their life in the waters, when they would die, their carcasses would sink to the bottom of the ocean and the sediment would cover them. And so that's why this is such a rich area for fossils, because it was a place where the right conditions existed for shelled animals to be living and for animals with backbones, vertebrates, to be living and dying. And the sediments were coming in and covering their carcasses. And so that's why we find so many fossils along Calvert Cliffs.
Was it fairly shallow when it was an ocean here, this area that we are getting all this deposition, because it was close to the land?
It was shallow, a shallow marine, no more than a couple 100 feet deep. And at times there was no water here. The ocean moved back and forth across the Atlantic coastal plain in response to changes in the global climate temperature during that 10 million year period of time.
So a lot of change. So it was a really dynamic area then. It
was forever changing. I mean, not rapidly.
Right,
you have million-year cycles. And so these are very gradual changes that in a human lifetime, you would not have noticed. I mean, we have the water rising today. It's the same process is happening all over again. We have global warming, and so the water is coming up again, and it's eroding the cliffs, and it's depositing new sediments in layers out in the Chesapeake Bay and out in the on the Atlantic coastal plain, out in the ocean.
So you mentioned earlier that you don't really need tools, but then you said if you are going to bring tools, let me talk just about some of those. So what are your suggestions if you are going to bring tools?
Well, it wouldn't hurt to bring like a screen or a sifter, something that has little holes in it that can let the water out and some of the coarse and fine sand out, keeping the smaller fossils trapped so that you can then pick them out. But again, I don't find it necessary, certainly at Bayfront Park, to do that. If you're a real keen bean and you want to find the really tiny shark teeth, really tiny micros, then you would want to screen wash the sediment, but you don't need that for starting out to find fossils and have them identified.
So once you have some fossils, what would you recommend in terms of how to go about identifying them? Would you start with the Calvert Marine Museum's website and start there?
Yeah, I think so. So like I said, you go to our opening page and you go down to, I'll just back up here just so I make sure I give you the correct information.
And we can post these links too with this video.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Yeah, so
definitely.
I won't go over it again then. So yeah, so the Marine Museum has an extensive listing of certainly the more common types of shells, fossil shells, fossil shark teeth, and some of the bones that can be found along Calvert Cliffs. So that'd be a great place to start. We also, in our museum store, sell this book, Fossils of Calvert Cliffs. So it's just a thin book, but it gives a really good introduction to the geology of the cliffs and some of the diversity of the shells and shark teeth that can be found along the cliffs, and some of the mode of preservation. So I'll just get the page here that shows the shark teeth so that you could see that.
That looks like a great resource. Those are fantastic drawings.
So
wow.
Yeah, so it has, I mean, obviously everybody would like to find a megalodon tooth. That's
Definitely.
the megatooth shark, yeah, Otodus megalodon.
And
That's what everybody.
is that the true size?
I mean, you could find a tooth that large, but
It's a big one.
and you would, yeah, if you didn't dig it out of the cliffs, you could keep it, and it would become a family heirloom. You know, so you don't have to give it to the Marine Museum. But you know, I also encourage people that if they find a fossil, if they've been in paleontology for a little while, and they find something that they don't recognize, or better yet, they see something in the cliffs, like what looks like maybe a piece of bone or something sticking out, contact us, because I've spent like my 23 years here at the museum getting to know a lot of the property owners along Calvert Cliffs. And most of them are really generous in allowing us to excavate the fossils and keep them and preserve them here in perpetuity for the public, in the public trust here at the Marine Museum. And so generally it's only a phone call away and they say, yeah, go ahead and get the fossil out. And so, you know, 3, 4, 5 times a year, we're out along the cliffs excavating either a whale skull, which can be up to 6 feet long, or more likely a dolphin skull, which can be up to 4 feet long from along Calvert Cliffs. So
Wow, that's incredible.
It's a great job. And we rely heavily upon citizen scientists. Paleontology is a branch of science where amateurs or avocational paleontologists can really make a significant contribution to the science of paleontology. Most of my research publications have been on fossils that have been found by the amateur community. So I value what they bring to paleontology and the passion that they have about collecting fossils.
It's really inspiring. I think that it's really empowering for citizens to think like, oh yeah, I could actually make a difference in science. I think that's exciting.
Oh, I just want to say one thing quickly about education and paleontology and getting into it. So and this is to encourage parents who might have children who are not performing particularly well in elementary or maybe even high school. So throughout all my educational years, except for my last year in high school, I was basically like towards the bottom or at the bottom of the class. I didn't get it. I was a very slow reader. I just was not motivated to be in school or do schoolwork. But in my final year of high school, I got scared. And it was a wonderful thing because I started working like a madman. But unfortunately, I had to work extra hard because I had not learned everything and kept up with my education like I should have. And but I was able to sort of make it up. And when I went to college, I did super well. And then I went on and got my degree in paleontology. So paleontology was my salvation. And
So it's never too late.
I never imagined as a child that I would become a paleontologist.
Mm-hmm.
I love natural history museums. I love going to museums and seeing like skeletons. And I'm actually more of an artist than I am a scientist. My natural abilities. And what's nice about paleontology is it allows you to also tap into your artistic side in terms of producing illustrations or photographs for your publications. So paleontology demands all kinds of skills that you know, you can start learning at a young age.
That's really good to know. I think that's something that maybe people don't necessarily think about, and yet is so exciting for kids, is how to incorporate, you know, art and science together. I think initially they might not seem like they go together, but here's a perfect example of how they absolutely do.
If you want to see some of my work, my website, it's kind of a vanity website, but it shows some of the art that I've done and the skeletons that I've mounted for other museums. It's sculptures.com. Now, Perfect. It's not sculptures spelled like a sculpture, but it's spelled SKULLPTURE, sculptures.com.
I love it.
So it's all about like, yeah, anatomy and morphology. So you can see, and that would be an inspiration, I hope, to adults to encourage their children artistically. What's nice about paleontology is that you can draw from so many different disciplines. Like I've published papers with so many different kinds of authors that bring information and help us like move the science of paleontology forward. We have not discovered everything in paleontology. There's still a lot left to be learned. And so if you're a child and you're wondering, you know, is there potentially a career for me in paleontology? Yes, there's a lot of information left for paleontologists to discover. So don't despair. We haven't learned everything there is to know about prehistoric life.
Absolutely. I think that's really good to hear too. I think so often when you're a kid and you're in school and you're learning science, you're like, oh, this is just how it is. It's never going to change. We know everything. And I think that, we just don't. There's so much that's left to learn. So it's a really good reminder. Ooh, what do you have there? That looks incredible.
Okay, so I thought it would be fun just to share a couple of stories from actual fossils. This vertebra was found by an avocational collector, Mike Elwood, along Calvert Cliffs. And this is a whale vertebra. It's a backbone from an extinct whale.
That's incredible.
And what's amazing about this vertebra is that this end of the bone is fine. It's nice and round like it ought to be. It's the articulating surface where it would attach to the next vertebra in the backbone. You can see the hole up there. That's where the spinal cord would go down the length of the backbone of the whale. But what you'll notice about the front end of it here is it's all messed up. There's this big fracture that goes across here. And this is not as a result of the process of fossilization. What this shows is that when this whale was alive, it was plowed into, it was ambushed by a giant shark, Megalodon.
Wow.
This is an actual tooth from a Megalodon that crashed into it, ambushed it either from behind or from below, and bent its backbone, bent the whale's backbone so much that so much pressure was applied to this part of the vertebra that it broke this piece off. It's called a compression fracture.
Oh my gosh.
But what's even more amazing is that this whale did not die during that encounter with Megalodon. It survived. We know that because there's new bone growth here that welded this piece that got jammed into the vertebra back onto the rest of the bone.
Oh my God.
So this was a hurting whale. And all the side of the bone here has hyperostosis, kind of extra bone growth. The bone was making like a callus. It was making like its own cast to try to hold it all together, to heal. But unfortunately, this whale then died. I don't know if it died of starvation or maybe another attack by a Megalodon, or maybe it just had an infection that it couldn't overcome and it died. But this bone tells an amazing story about predation, about an encounter with this whale, with Megalodon, with the giant shark.
That's really incredible. And I love that it's such an amazing story. I mean, that's exactly what you were talking about, how fossils tell stories. And that's such a fantastic example. So how often do you find something like that, or is someone presents something like that to you?
So it's uneven, but I mean, we can go for a while where we don't have many donations, and then all of a sudden we'll have numerous people who will donate fossils to us. And so a lot of the fossils that come to us, they were collected just along the beach, and people don't know exactly what layer they came from. So in our permanent collection, we have very strict requirements as to what we will keep forever in our collection. If it's just shells, broken shells, or just isolated shark teeth that have been found along Calvert Cliffs, we will gladly accept those, but they will go usually to our education department, which will use them for kits that they give out to children or teachers at school to encourage people in the science of paleontology. So for fossils that we keep, they're usually ones that are exceedingly rare, like the land mammals, like an elephant tooth or a rhinoceros tooth. There were those kinds of animals that were living here during the Miocene epoch. And those, if we know what layer they came from, we will add those to our permanent collection.
So what are some of the most interesting fossils that you have come across while you've been at the Calvert Marine Museum?
Well, certainly the one that I just showed you tells an amazing story, and that's one of my research projects right now. This is also kind of a fun fossil.
It sort of looks like a snail shell, but
Sort of looks like
it's
a snail
so,
shell. It sort of looks like some sediment may be filled inside a snail shell, eh?
yeah.
No,
Oh.
no. It's way better than that. So this is actually a coprolite. And the term coprolite is the technical term that we give to fossilized feces.
Yes,
This
dinosaur poop.
This is especially fun. Well, this didn't come from a dinosaur. This came from a relative of the dinosaurs, a crocodilian. There were large crocodiles that lived here, and we think that this kind of fossilized poop came from one of the large crocodiles that lived here. And this one's fun because it has basically the rifle marks right at the end as it pinched its cloaca closed around the feces that came out. So
That's
You know, I'm
incredible.
an old man, but I didn't grow up, because I find stories like this kind of fun too. It's really neat. And I love going to school groups and, you know, passing around a coprolite before they know it's a coprolite. And just the ick factor is great fun. So that's a neat fossil.
So how big would that animal have been? Is it sort of similar to our alligators that we have now?
Right. So they're similar size to the largest living crocodiles, which would be like the Nile croc.
Oh, wow.
Or the saltwater crocodiles. So in the 15 to 20 foot long range. So really big animals, big predators. So another one of the neat stories that we can tell from some shark teeth is one like this. So this is a Megalodon tooth that was found along Calvert Cliffs.
Wow.
And what's interesting about it is right up here in the root of the tooth, there's a deep gouge running across it. So we can tell from the gouge that that didn't happen during the process of fossilization. That happened before it became a fossil. And so what happened was, the simplest explanation is that the shark, the giant shark, was hunting, and say it bit into a whale so hard that this tooth became embedded in the flesh of the whale. And when the shark released its bite, this tooth stayed in the whale. Okay, so sharks shed their teeth, and so it's not uncommon. In fact, the teeth that you find along Calvert Cliffs are shark teeth that the sharks have shed naturally throughout their lifetime. They can produce many hundreds or even thousands of shark teeth during their lifetime. And so with this tooth embedded in the body of the whale, then the shark took another bite, and one of its teeth actually cut down the sharp serrated edge of the Megalodon tooth, cut into the root of the Megalodon tooth itself.
Oh my gosh.
So it's basically a self-cut Megalodon tooth.
Crazy.
But here's the other possibility. It's possible, we know from studying modern sharks that they can be cannibals, and there's shark on shark predation. And so it's possible that this tooth was actually in a Megalodon that was attacked by another Megalodon, and that cut represents a gouge that was made in the root of the tooth when one shark was dismembering another one. It could be Megalodon on Megalodon predation.
Oh my gosh.
Which
Amazing.
we can't prove from this, but it's one of the possible explanations for how that deep gouge got into the root of that tooth.
Such a fun story. Well, thank you so much to Dr. Stephen Godfrey for joining us today. Your stories are just incredible, and I think you really do a fantastic job of highlighting how exciting paleontology is, and that it's well and alive right now today at the Calvert Marine Museum. So everyone should definitely go down there and check it out while they can. I also want to say thank you to our viewers and listeners today. Make sure that you do visit ChesapeakeFamily.com for up-to-date local information on home, health, and living for today's Maryland parent. We also will have all the links that Dr. Godfrey spoke about, and so you can click on those with this video. This episode will be archived at ChesapeakeFamily.com in video and podcast format. I'm Janet Jefferson with Chesapeake Family Life and Third Floor Views. Thank you so much.